Is Denmark producing enough fruit and vegetables? Should Muslims be allowed to run their own scout organizations? And can adoptees ever truly be Danish? It's week 31. I'm Amos Miller, and this is the Danish Press Review. This week, the coverage in both Berlingske and Kristeligt Dagblad have been consumed by reporting on the Muslim scout troop Samarkand Spejder, who runs separate activities for boys and girls. In Tuesday's edition of Kristeligt Dagblad, Niels Hein reports on the connection of the scout troop to a Sufi organization based out of Turkey. The Muslim scout troop is a part of the association Samarkand Youth, which has connections to the Samarkand Fund, a religious group which runs schools, hospitals, travel bureaus, and media organizations in Turkey, but is also active with associations in European countries, including Denmark. Samarkand Youth denies having any economic or organizational ties to the Samarkand Fund, but Niels Hein points out that members of the youth organization have traveled using their travel bureaus, and in 2017, a group visited the fund's headquarters in Istanbul. Samarkand Spejder, a part of the Kofum Spejder, or KFUM Scouts, who were asked if they previously knew about the alleged connection between Samarkand Spejder and the Turkish fund. The KFUM Scouts are interested in having as many children and youth as scouts as possible. Therefore, we went into cooperation with the Samarkand Youth on scouting, because they were and are members of DUF, the Danish Youth Council, and thus are an established democratic association on the same footing as all other DUF members in the Danish association life. At the root of the story is that the Samarkand Spejder runs separate activities for boys and girls. However, this critique has been countered pushback as some other scouting organizations, such as De Grønne Pigespejder or the Green Girl Scouts, already segregate based on sex. Emil Lund, in Monday's edition of Berlingske, interviews Susie Jensen, a political spokesperson for Danmarksdemokraterne, about her concerns over the Muslim Scouting Association. Jensen is fine with De Grønne Pigespejder's gender segregation, because De Grønne Pigespejder's reason for gender segregation doesn't deal with honorability or to separate girls from men. It's not to keep girls and women in a spider web of social control, where you've got control of whom someone speaks to and how they conduct themselves. When Emil Lund pushes Jensen on her uncorroborated claims that Samarkand Spejder are separating boys and girls for the sake of social control, she responds, "When they say that it's an Islamic association, then I assume that gender separation is on account of honorability culture." Once again, when asked, the KFUM Scouts don't see a problem with the Samarkand Spejder, pointing out that many other youth associations in Denmark separate boys and girls in their activities and teams. The conversation could have real economic consequences for youth associations in Denmark, as Anna Elsgaard, in the Wednesday edition of Kristeligt Dagblad, speaks with multiple politicians who are using the case to question the Danish Youth Council and KFUM Scouts. Political spokesperson for Liberal Alliance, Mads Streng, DUF has not been good enough at controlling who receives state funding. And cultural spokesperson for Conservative, Birgitte Bergman, when an association receives state funding, there needs to be no doubt about who the association is connected to or which values it's built upon. At the same time, it's Samarkand Youth's responsibility to document that potential organizational, economic, or ideological connections to the Menzil Society and Samarkand Fund are actually closed. The episode has pushed the Danish Youth Council to form an internal investigation into potential connections between the Samarkand Youth and the Samarkand Fund. In Wednesday's edition of Information, an interview with a Danish woman who was adopted as a one-year-old from southern India highlights the way in which Denmark's caustic political environment around immigration can pull in people who never considered themselves anything other than Danish. "My husband said, 'That could never happen to you. You won't be affected. You're Danish.' But then it happened." Christine Isha Christensen was adopted in 1977 by a Danish family when she was only 1 year old. She's been a Danish citizen from the moment of adoption and has grown up speaking Danish, attending Danish schools, and living a completely Danish life. But the heightened rhetoric around immigration and several recent law changes have left her feeling like a second-class citizen. "I began hearing immigration critiques from people I knew, followed by a sentence like, 'But not you, Christina. You are one of the good ones.' I stood back and thought, am I Danish? And if not, what am I then? I don't have any other citizenship." Last year, the Folketing adopted a law that required anyone with non-Western backgrounds to work forced full-time jobs if they were to receive the welfare payment known as citizenship. But this law also applied to people like Christina, adopted as a child from a non-Western country. Christensen wrote to then Employment Minister Anna Helsbo Jørgensen. I wrote to her to explain that if I don't have full Danish citizenship, then I am essentially stateless. What is it you want to tell me as a minister in this case? Right before passage, adoptees were written out of the law, but a person like Christensen would still have to inform authorities about her adopted status if she needed to apply for citizenship. But this experience has left Christensen shaken, increasingly sees Danish of ethnic backgrounds being separated into boxes like A, B, and C, and maybe D, in relation to our legal and economic rights. And I just think that we should be really careful. And lastly, an opinion piece in Monday's edition of Information. Too many frikadiller, too few apples. While fields overflow with feed to millions of pigs, we are deeply dependent on other countries to put fruit and vegetables on the table. That makes us vulnerable in crisis times. Karen Syberg argues that Denmark should reprioritize its farming industry away from pigs and towards fruits and vegetables for the home market. According to a report last year from Madkulturen, Denmark only produces 26% of its own vegetables. It is also the lowest land usage for fruits and vegetables in the EU, with only 0.6% of the total land used to grow produce. Almost half of Denmark is used to grow feed for its 30 million plus pigs. Syberg contends that this disparity in produce production could come back to bite Denmark if global produce supply chains were disrupted. There are the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine. Climate change is becoming ever more threatening, worse than we expected until only recently. That can affect foreign production with drought and flooding. It's happening already, which altogether could quickly shut freight routes and more or less block trade with Europe. That's it for week 31 of the Danish Press Review. Thanks for coming by. See you next week.